Marcus Chen stared at the datapad in his hands, his heart pounding as the numbers confirmed his worst fears. The fuel consumption logs, the communication records, the supply manifests, everything pointed to one terrible conclusion. His crewmates were planning to sabotage the peace talks between humanity and the Krex Empire. The bridge of the starship Concordia hummed around him with its usual activity. Alien voices mixed with the soft beeping of computers and the gentle whoosh of air recyclers. Marcus had served on this ship for 3 years, fighting alongside these beings, sharing meals with them, considering many of them friends. Now he realized how wrong he had been. "Commander Chen, you look troubled," said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Zektar, the ship's Vorthak security chief. The reptilian being's scales shimmered under the bridge lights, and his yellow eyes studied Marcus with what seemed like concern. "Just reviewing some reports," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He closed the datapad and slipped it into his jacket. "Nothing important." Zektar's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "Your stress pheromones suggest otherwise, human. Perhaps you should rest." Marcus forced a smile. "I'm fine, really. Just tired," but he wasn't fine. The evidence he had found was clear. Someone had been redirecting medical supplies meant for human colonies to black market dealers. Communication systems had been modified to intercept and delay human military messages. Most damaging of all, the ship's weapon systems had been programmed with a hidden code that would disable them during the upcoming peace conference. The humans were walking into a trap, and their own allies were setting it. Marcus made his way through the ship's corridors, nodding to crew members as he passed. A group of Zelani engineers chittered among themselves near the engine room. Their insect-like bodies moved with quick, nervous energy. One of them, tech specialist Vixka, had always been friendly to Marcus. Now he wondered if that friendship was real, or just another part of the deception. He reached his quarters and locked the door behind him. His hand shook as he activated his personal communication unit. He needed to contact Earth Command immediately, but as he began entering the codes, his door chimed. "Come in," he called, quickly hiding the communication device. Captain Thelnara entered, her blue Zelani skin pale in the artificial light. Her large, compound eyes reflected the room's glow as she studied him. "Marcus, we need to talk." "Of course, Captain. What can I do for you?" "I think you know." Her voice was soft but carried an edge that Marcus had never heard before. "Zektar says you've been accessing files that don't concern your duties." Marcus's mind raced. "I was just doing routine maintenance checks on the communication logs." "Standard procedure for—" "Don't lie to me." Thelnara stepped closer. "We know what you found." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. They knew. Somehow they knew he had discovered their plan. "Captain, if you'll just let me explain what I've discovered." "What you've discovered," she interrupted, "is classified information that you had no right to access. Information that in the wrong hands could start a war." "Start a war?" Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Captain, they're planning to murder hundreds of human diplomats. The peace talks are a trap. We have to warn Earth Command." Thelnara's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation in her species. "You don't understand the bigger picture, Marcus. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good." "Whose greater good?" Marcus demanded. "Because it certainly isn't humanity's." The captain's expression hardened. "Humanity has grown too powerful too quickly. Your species threatens the balance that has kept the galaxy peaceful for centuries. The other races are afraid, and fear leads to war. A few hundred diplomats dying now might prevent millions from dying later." Marcus felt sick. "You're talking about genocide. I'm talking about survival. The survival of every other species in the galaxy." Thelnara touched a control on her wrist and the door sealed with a soft hiss. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I genuinely am. You're a good officer, and under different circumstances we might have found another way." The room suddenly filled with armed security personnel. Zektar led them, his weapon already drawn and pointed at Marcus's chest. Behind him came Vixka and 3 other crew members Marcus had considered friends. "Marcus Chen," Zektar announced formally. "You are under arrest for treason, espionage, and conspiracy against the Galactic Alliance." "That's insane," Marcus protested. "I'm trying to stop a conspiracy, not start one." "The evidence says otherwise," Vixka spoke up, her voice buzzing with barely contained excitement. "We found classified human military codes in your personal files. Plans for attacking Alliance ships, communications with known human extremist groups. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. You planted that evidence. Prove it, Zektar hissed, his reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile. They marched him through the ship's corridors. Crew members he had served with for years watched silently as he passed. Some looked sad, others angry, but none spoke in his defense. Marcus realized that the conspiracy went deeper than he had imagined. This wasn't just a few officers planning sabotage. This was a coordinated effort involving most of the non-human crew. The trial took place in the ship's main conference room. Marcus sat alone at a small table while a panel of his former colleagues sat in judgment. The evidence against him was overwhelming and completely fabricated. Forged communications, planted files, testimony from crew members he had trusted. The defendant stands accused of high treason, Captain Thelnara announced. The evidence is clear and undeniable. However, in recognition of his past service, we will not execute him immediately. Marcus felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. What are you going to do with me? We're going to give you a chance, Zektar said, his yellow eyes gleaming. A chance to survive if you're as adaptable as your species claims to be. They brought up a holographic display of a green and blue planet. It looked almost beautiful from space, covered in lush forests and sparkling oceans. Kythera Prime, Thelnara explained. A garden world full of life and natural beauty. You'll be given basic survival supplies and set down on the surface. If you can survive for 1 standard year, you'll be considered to have served your sentence. Marcus looked at the faces around him. And if I don't survive? Then justice will have been served. Vixka buzzed happily. They didn't tell him about Kythera Prime's other name, the Death World. They didn't mention that it was used as an execution ground by several species, or that the average survival time for marooned prisoners was 72 hours. They didn't explain that the planet's beautiful forests were filled with creatures that had evolved to kill anything that moved. As they loaded him into the escape pod, Marcus caught Captain Thelnara's arm. When the peace talks fail and humans start dying, remember that you could have prevented it. She pulled away from him. When you're dead, remember that you brought this on yourself. The pod launched with a violent shudder that threw Marcus against the restraints. Through the small porthole, he watched the Concordia grow smaller, until it was just another star in the darkness. Then Kythera Prime filled his view, growing larger and more detailed with each passing moment. As the pod began its fiery descent through the atmosphere, Marcus made himself a promise. If he survived this, if he found a way off this world, he would make them pay for what they had done. Not just to him, but to every human who would die because of their betrayal. The jungle below reached up to claim him, but Marcus Chen was not ready to die. The escape pod hit the jungle canopy with a thunderous crash that shook Marcus to his bones. Metal screamed against ancient trees as the pod tore through branches thick as his torso, finally slamming into the forest floor with enough force to crack the hull. Marcus hung upside down in his restraints, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. His ears rang from the impact, but he was alive. He fumbled with the release mechanism and dropped to what had been the pod's ceiling, landing hard on scattered debris. The air that rushed in through the cracked hull was thick and humid, filled with strange scents that made his nose burn. Everything glowed with a soft, eerie light that seemed to come from the plants themselves. Mushrooms the size of dinner plates pulsed with blue radiance, while vines that hung from towering trees sparkled like Christmas lights. Marcus grabbed the emergency kit from its housing and took stock of his supplies. A basic medical kit, 3 days of rations, a water purifier, a small knife, and an emergency beacon that would only work if a ship came within 10 kilometers. Given that his former crewmates thought they were sending him to his death, that beacon was useless. He pulled on the survival suit that came with the kit. It was designed to protect against radiation and extreme temperatures, but he doubted it would help much against whatever lived in this glowing jungle. The first sound that told him he wasn't alone was a gentle clicking, like fingernails tapping on glass. Marcus froze, listening carefully. The clicking came again, this time from a different direction. Then another and another until the sound seemed to surround him. Through the pod's cracked porthole, he saw them. Insects the size of house cats with shells that gleamed like polished metal, and mandibles that could probably cut through bone. They moved in perfect coordination, examining the crashed pod with obvious intelligence. One of them approached the hull breach where Marcus crouched. Its compound eyes, each one as large as his fist, studied him with unsettling focus. The creature's mandibles opened and closed, producing that clicking sound. More insects gathered behind it, their shells reflecting the jungle's bioluminescent glow. Marcus gripped his knife tighter, knowing it would be useless against so many. But instead of attacking, the insects simply watched him. After several tense minutes, they clicked once more in unison and moved away, disappearing into the undergrowth as silently as they had arrived. He waited another hour before leaving the pod. The jungle floor was spongy beneath his feet, covered in a carpet of moss that glowed faintly green when disturbed. Massive trees stretched up into darkness, their trunks so wide that 20 men holding hands couldn't circle them. Strange calls echoed through the canopy above, some musical, others harsh and threatening. Marcus needed water first. The suit's sensors detected moisture in the air, but the water purifier would only work on liquid water. He picked a direction and started walking, trying to ignore the feeling that something was watching him from the shadows. The first attack came without warning. A vine as thick as his arm whipped down from above, wrapping around his throat with crushing force. Marcus grabbed at it desperately, feeling thorns pierce his gloves and draw blood. The vine was surprisingly strong, lifting him off his feet as it tried to drag him up into the canopy. He managed to get his knife between the vine and his neck, sawing frantically at the tough plant fiber. Green sap sprayed out, burning his exposed skin like acid. The vine loosened just enough for him to break free, and Marcus fell hard to the jungle floor. More vines descended from above, moving with predatory intent. Marcus rolled aside as one slammed into the ground where he had been lying, leaving a smoking crater in the moss. These weren't just plants. They were active hunters, and he was their prey. He ran, crashing through the undergrowth as the carnivorous vines pursued him. Behind him, he could hear them destroying everything in their path, their acidic sap burning through trees and smaller plants. Something roared in the distance, a sound so deep and powerful that it seemed to shake the very air. Marcus stumbled into a clearing dominated by a small stream. The water looked clean, reflecting the jungle's bioluminescent glow like liquid starlight. He activated the water purifier and filled his containers, constantly looking over his shoulder for pursuing vines or other threats. As he drank, he noticed movement in the trees across the stream. At first, he thought it was just shadows playing tricks on his eyes. Then he saw them clearly. Cat-like creatures the size of leopards, but wrong in ways that made his brain hurt to look at them. They seemed to flicker in and out of existence, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent as smoke. One of them stepped toward the stream, and Marcus saw its eyes, completely black voids that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The creature opened its mouth, revealing teeth that looked like they were made of crystallized darkness. It made a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. More of the shadow cats emerged from the trees. Marcus counted 6, then 8, then lost count as they flickered between solid and ethereal states. They surrounded the stream, cutting off his escape routes. When they moved, reality seemed to bend around them, leaving trails of nothingness in the air. Marcus backed into the center of the stream, knife raised uselessly. These things didn't look like they could be hurt by normal weapons. One of them stepped onto the water's surface as if it were solid ground. Its void eyes fixed on him with alien hunger. Then the jungle exploded. Something massive crashed through the trees, moving with impossible speed and power. The shadow cats scattered, some vanishing entirely while others fled into the canopy. Marcus caught a glimpse of scales that gleamed like black metal, claws the length of swords, and eyes that burned like molten amber. The newcomer was a creature from nightmares, 20 feet long from nose to tail, built like a cross between a giant lizard and a tiger. 6 powerful legs ended in claws that could tear through steel, while armored scales covered its body like natural chainmail. When it roared, the sound was so powerful that several trees cracked and fell. But it wasn't looking at Marcus. The beast's attention was focused on something else, a smaller version of itself, badly wounded and barely conscious, lying at the edge of the clearing. The young creature's scales were dull with pain and blood, and one of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle. The adult creature, obviously the parent, positioned itself between its offspring and the remaining shadow cats. It roared again, a challenge that echoed through the jungle for miles. The shadow cats hesitated, flickering between states as they considered whether this fight was worth the risk. Marcus realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. This apex predator, this perfect killing machine that could have torn him apart without effort, was protecting its young. The same instinct that drove human parents to sacrifice everything for their children was at work here. One of the shadow cats made a decision and phased toward the wounded youngling. The parent intercepted it with devastating speed, claws tearing through the creature's semi-solid form. The shadow cat let out that glass-breaking scream and dissolved into smoke, but two more took its place. The parent was outnumbered, and Marcus could see exhaustion in its movements. It had probably been fighting these things for hours, trying to protect its injured offspring. Soon it would fall and both creatures would die. Marcus looked at the knife in his hand, then at the emergency flare from his survival kit. It was a stupid idea. It was probably a suicidal idea. But as he watched the magnificent creature fight impossible odds to protect its child, he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He pulled the pin on the flare and threw it toward the shadow cats. Brilliant red light exploded across the clearing, and the creatures recoiled as if they had been burned. Their forms became unstable, flickering rapidly between solid and ethereal states. The parent creature glanced at Marcus for just a moment, long enough for their eyes to meet. In those amber depths, Marcus saw surprise, confusion, and perhaps something that might have been gratitude. Then the beast turned back to its enemies and pressed its attack while they were weakened by the light. The shadow cats retreated, vanishing into the jungle's depths. The parent creature stood over its offspring, sides heaving with exhaustion. It looked at Marcus again, and this time there was unmistakable intelligence in its gaze. The creature was thinking, evaluating, making decisions. Marcus stayed very still as the apex predator approached him. Each step shook the ground, and up close he could see just how perfectly designed for killing this creature was. But when it stopped just inches away, Marcus felt no fear. Instead, he felt the beginning of something that would change his life forever. The creature sniffed at him, its breath hot against his face. Then it did something unexpected. It lowered its massive head in what looked almost like a nod of acknowledgement before turning back to its wounded offspring. Marcus had just made first contact with Kythera Prime's apex predator, and somehow he was still alive. Marcus spent the next hour watching from a safe distance as the adult creature tended to its injured offspring. The massive predator was surprisingly gentle, using its claws to carefully clean wounds and its long tongue to apply what looked like medicinal saliva to the worst injuries. The young one was badly hurt. Marcus could see that its left hind leg was broken, and deep gashes covered its flanks where the shadow cats had managed to strike. Without proper medical attention, infection would set in within days. On a world like this, infection meant death. The parent creature kept glancing at Marcus as if trying to decide what to do about the strange alien who had helped them. Marcus remained perfectly still, not wanting to provoke an attack but unable to leave. Something about the scene reminded him of his own childhood, when his father had sat by his bedside during a particularly bad illness, never leaving, never giving up hope. As the hours passed, Marcus noticed that the adult's movements were becoming slower and more labored. Several deep wounds marked its scales, souvenirs from the fight with the shadow cats. The creature was injured too, possibly worse than it was letting on. When the sun began to set, casting the jungle into even stranger patterns of bioluminescent light, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane just days ago. He approached the two creatures, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. The parent's head snapped up, amber eyes tracking his every movement. A low growl rumbled from its throat, but it didn't attack. Marcus stopped just outside what he estimated was the creature's strike range and slowly opened his medical kit. "Easy," he said softly, knowing the creature couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone would convey peaceful intent. "I want to help." He took out the antiseptic spray and held it up where both creatures could see it. The young one lifted its head weakly, studying him with eyes that seemed far too intelligent for any animal Marcus had ever known. Its parent remained tense but didn't move as Marcus took another step closer. Marcus had worked as a field medic during the border wars with the hegemony. He knew how to treat wounds and set bones, skills that had saved dozens of human lives. Now he found himself wondering if alien physiology was similar enough for those skills to matter. He sprayed antiseptic on his hands, then gestured to the young creature's injured leg. The parent's growl intensified, but when the offspring made a soft chirping sound, the adult reluctantly stepped back. Marcus knelt beside the wounded youngling and began to examine its injuries. The creature's scales were softer than its parents, still growing and developing. The broken bone was a clean fracture, which meant it could heal properly if set correctly. But the lacerations were showing early signs of infection. Working as carefully as he could, Marcus cleaned the wounds with antiseptic. The young creature whimpered but didn't pull away, as if it understood he was trying to help. Its parent paced nearby, clearly agitated but allowing the treatment to continue. The hardest part was setting the broken bone. Marcus had to manipulate the leg while the youngling writhed in pain, its claws leaving deep scratches in the ground. He used supplies from the medical kit to create a makeshift splint, hoping it would hold long enough for healing to begin. When he finished, both creatures were staring at him with what looked like amazement. Marcus sat back on his heels, exhausted from the delicate work. The young one experimentally moved its splinted leg, then made that soft chirping sound again. The parent approached slowly, its massive head lowering to examine Marcus's work. After a long moment, it looked directly into Marcus's eyes and made a sound unlike any he had heard before. A complex series of clicks, whistles, and subsonic rumbles that seemed to carry meaning far beyond simple animal communication. Marcus tried to respond, mimicking the sounds as best he could. His attempt was clumsy and probably meaningless, but the creature's eyes widened with what might have been surprise. It repeated the sound pattern, slower this time, as if trying to teach him. Over the following days, Marcus established a routine. He would forage for food during the daylight hours, always staying within sight of the two creatures. The jungle provided if you knew where to look, fruits that registered as safe on his scanner, roots that could be boiled into something edible, and insects that were surprisingly nutritious despite their appearance. The parent creature, which Marcus had begun thinking of as Apex, proved to be an excellent hunter. It would disappear for hours at a time, always returning with fresh meat from creatures Marcus hadn't even known existed. Some of the kills were clearly meant for him, smaller portions of meat that had been carefully cleaned and prepared. The young one, which he dubbed Scout, based on its apparent curiosity about everything, recovered quickly under Marcus's care. Its natural healing abilities were remarkable, far beyond anything human medicine could achieve. Within a week, it was putting weight on the injured leg. Within 2 weeks, it was walking normally, but the most extraordinary development was the communication. Both creatures were clearly intelligent, far more so than any earth animal Marcus had encountered. They had a complex language of sounds, body movements, and what Marcus gradually realized were bioelectric signals that created subtle changes in the bioluminescent patterns of their scales. Apex began teaching him deliberately, repeating certain sound combinations until Marcus could approximate them. Simple concepts at first: danger, food, safety, family. But as the weeks passed, the lessons became more complex. Marcus learned to recognize the signals for different types of threats. The calls that meant follow me or stay hidden, and even what seemed to be proper names for various landmarks in their territory. In return, Marcus shared his own knowledge. He showed them how to use tools, demonstrating how a sharp stone could be more effective than claws for certain tasks. He taught them about fire, carefully building small cooking fires that both creatures found fascinating. Most importantly, he shared his tactical thinking. Apex was already an effective hunter, but Marcus's military training added new dimensions to their cooperation. He scouted ahead to identify prey movements, set up ambushes, and coordinated attacks that maximized their success rate while minimizing risk. The results were impressive. They were taking down prey twice the size of what Apex had been hunting alone. But the real breakthrough came during a hunt for something. Apex called a stoneback, a heavily armored herbivore the size of a rhinoceros. Marcus had positioned himself in a tree to observe the creature's movement patterns when he noticed something that the ground-level perspective had missed. The stoneback's armor had a weak point at the base of its neck, invisible from below but clearly visible from above. Using the simple signals they had developed, Marcus directed Apex to circle around while Scout created a distraction. When the stoneback lowered its head to investigate the young predator, Apex struck precisely where Marcus had indicated. The hunt that should have taken hours was over in minutes. That night, as they shared the massive meal around Marcus's fire, Apex did something unprecedented. The great creature approached Marcus and gently touched his forehead with its own, a gesture that Scout had told Him meant family and their complex language. Marcus felt tears running down his face as he returned the gesture. He had been cast out by his own species, betrayed by those he had trusted and left to die on an alien world. But here in the deadly jungle of Kithara Prime, he had found something he had never expected, a family that would accept him not despite his differences, but because of them. The three of them had become a pack, each member contributing their unique strengths to the group's survival. Apex provided raw power and hunting instinct, Scout offered agility and keen senses, and Marcus brought intelligence and tactical thinking that elevated them all. As the months passed, Marcus learned that they weren't the only pack in the jungle. There were others, family groups of the apex predators that controlled different territories. Most avoided each other, but some were actively hostile. Apex bore scars from territorial battles, evidence of conflicts that could turn deadly without warning. Marcus also discovered that his new family's intelligence went far beyond what he had initially realized. They had names for themselves, complex social structures, and what seemed to be cultural traditions passed down through generations. They weren't just animals, they were people, as real and deserving of respect as any sentient species in the galaxy. The realization changed everything for Marcus. He wasn't just surviving on Kithara Prime anymore. He was learning, growing, and becoming part of something larger than himself. The jungle that had been meant to kill him was teaching him lessons that no human had ever learned, and in the back of his mind, a plan was beginning to form. The crew of the Concordia had made a terrible mistake when they cast him out. They had assumed that removing him would eliminate the threat he represented. Instead, they had given him time to prepare, to learn, and to forge alliances they couldn't possibly imagine. When the time came to return, Marcus Chen would not be the same man they had betrayed. He would be something new, something unprecedented in galactic history, and he would have friends whose loyalty had been earned through shared struggle and mutual respect. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed a human too far. 6 months after the crash, Marcus no longer looked like the clean-cut officer who had been cast out from the Concordia. His hair had grown long and wild. His skin was deeply tanned and marked with ritual scars that matched those of his adopted family. The standard-issue survival suit had been replaced with armor crafted from the scales and bones of their prey, protection that was both practical and symbolic of his new identity. He rode through the jungle canopy on Apex's back, moving with the fluid grace of a creature born to this environment. The great predator's powerful muscles bunched and released as it leaped from branch to branch, covering ground that would take a human hours to traverse in mere minutes. Behind them, Scout and 3 other juveniles from neighboring packs followed in perfect formation. Marcus had learned to read the jungle's moods like an open book. The subtle changes in bioluminescent patterns that warned of approaching storms, the shift in insect calls that indicated a major predator was moving through the area, the way certain plants closed their leaves when the shadow cats were hunting nearby. This world that had been designed to kill him had become his greatest teacher. But today was different. Today, the jungle's normal rhythms were disturbed by something that didn't belong, the electronic signature of off-world technology. Marcus guided Apex to a high perch overlooking a clearing where a survey shuttle had landed. Through the scope he had salvaged from his crashed pod, he watched a mixed crew of aliens setting up temporary shelters and scanning equipment. They were being careful, professional, but they had no idea they were being watched by something that had learned to move like a ghost through their blind spots. The crew was from the Concordia, he realized with a mixture of rage and anticipation. Captain Thelnara was there, along with Zektar and several others who had participated in his mock trial. They were here to verify his death, to close the file on Commander Marcus Chen once and for all. Marcus smiled grimly as he watched them work. They had no idea that their former crewmate was not only alive, but had become something they could never have imagined. 6 months in the crucible of Kithara Prime had forged him into a new kind of warrior, one who combined human intelligence with predator instincts. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment. The jungle around the survey site had been carefully mapped, with escape routes and ambush points marked and memorized. Caches of supplies and weapons had been hidden throughout the area. Most importantly, he had gathered intelligence on his former crewmates' capabilities and weaknesses through careful observation of their equipment and recommendations. The first move was subtle. Marcus and his pack began systematically raiding the survey team's supplies, taking just enough to cause problems without triggering a full alert. Food rations disappeared overnight. Water purification tablets vanished from sealed containers. Power cells for their equipment were drained and replaced with dead ones. The aliens' frustration grew with each passing day. Marcus watched from concealment as Zektar accused team members of incompetence, while Thelnara ordered increasingly strict security measures. They suspected equipment failure or perhaps theft by the local wildlife, but they never imagined they were being hunted by their former colleague. On the third night, Marcus escalated the psychological warfare. Using techniques Scout had taught him about moving silently through the jungle, he infiltrated their camp while they slept. He didn't take anything this time. Instead, he left signs of his presence, small rearrangements of equipment, personal items moved to different locations, messages written in human script where only the survey team would find them. The messages were simple but effective. Still alive. Still watching. Still remembering. The reaction was immediate and satisfying. Zektar roared about impossible security breaches while his team searched frantically for signs of intrusion. Thelnara, her compound eyes wide with growing fear, ordered round-the-clock watches and energy barriers around their camp. But Marcus had learned from the apex predators how to hunt prey that was aware of being hunted. The jungle itself became his ally in ways the survey team couldn't comprehend. Marcus had formed relationships with other native species beyond his adopted pack. The giant insects that had first examined his crash site now served as his scouts, their clicking communications carrying information across miles of forest. The carnivorous vines had learned to recognize his scent and would actively hunt any other humans who entered their territory. Most useful of all were the shadow cats. The same creatures that had once threatened his life now worked with him, their ability to phase between dimensions making them perfect for reconnaissance and misdirection. They would appear at the edge of the alien's vision just long enough to create panic, then vanish before weapons could be brought to bear. By the end of the first week, the survey team was jumping at every sound. Sleep-deprived and paranoid, they made increasingly desperate attempts to locate their tormentor. Sensor sweeps found nothing. Armed patrols discovered only empty jungle. The psychological pressure was taking its toll exactly as Marcus had planned, but he wasn't content to simply drive them mad with fear. Marcus had learned the art of war from creatures that had perfected it over millions of years of evolution. Every hunt had a purpose, every attack served a greater strategy. He was preparing them for something much worse than fear. On the 8th night, Marcus made his first direct move against their equipment. Using climbing skills that Apex had taught him, he scaled the trees above their camp and dropped down onto their shuttle. The energy barriers were designed to keep out ground-based threats, not attacks from above. He didn't try to steal the shuttle or damage it beyond repair. Instead, he made subtle modifications to its systems, changes that would create cascading failures at exactly the right moment. Navigation computers were programmed with false coordinates. Communication arrays were fitted with feedback loops that would overload at predetermined times. Life support systems were given hidden shutdown commands that could be triggered remotely. The beauty of it was that none of the sabotage would be detected by routine diagnostics. Marcus had learned these techniques during his years in fleet service, but now he applied them with the patience and precision of an apex predator. Every modification was a trap waiting to spring, and only he knew when and how they would activate. By day, Marcus continued his psychological warfare. He would appear briefly at extreme range, just long enough for the survey team to catch a glimpse of a figure moving through the jungle. Sometimes he rode Apex, the sight of a human mounted on an apex predator so impossible that several team members convinced themselves they were hallucinating. The breaking point came during the second week, when Vixka, the Zilani engineer who had helped frame him, volunteered for a solo reconnaissance mission. She was trying to prove her courage to the increasingly demoralized team, but Marcus recognized the desperation in her movements. He let her penetrate deep into the jungle before making his move. Scout and 2 other juveniles herded her toward a clearing where Marcus waited, mounted on Apex and flanked by shadow cats that flickered in and out of visibility. The sight that greeted Vixka was something out of her species' most ancient nightmares. An apex predator under intelligent control, backed by creatures that shouldn't exist. Marcus spoke to her in her own language, Words he had learned during their years serving together. "Hello, Vixka. Did you miss me?" The engineer's mandibles clicked frantically as she raised her weapon, but Marcus was already moving. Apex leaped forward with impossible speed, covering the distance between them before Vixka could fire. The great predator stopped just short of crushing her, its massive head lowering until she was staring directly into those burning amber eyes. "I could kill you right now," Marcus said conversationally. "Apex here could tear you apart in seconds, and the Shadow Cats would make sure nothing was left to find. But I want you to do something for me instead." Vixka's weapon trembled in her grip. What do you want?" Marcus smiled, and Vixka realized that 6 months in the jungle had changed more than just his appearance. There was something wild in his eyes now, something that belonged more to the predator he rode than to the species he had been born into. "I want you to go back to your team," he said. "I want you to tell them exactly what you saw here, and I want you to deliver a message to Captain Thelnara." "What message?" "Tell her that Commander Marcus Chen requests a formal meeting. Tomorrow at sunset in the clearing where my pod crashed, she can bring as many weapons as she wants, as many guards as she thinks she needs. It won't matter." Vixka's compound eyes reflected the jungle's bioluminescent glow as she stared at him. "Why?" "Because it's time for the hunt to end," Marcus replied. "And time for the reckoning to begin." He guided Apex backward, giving Vixka room to flee. She didn't need to be told twice. The engineer turned and ran through the jungle with desperate speed, crashing through undergrowth in her panic to escape. Marcus watched her go, then turned to address his pack in their complex language of sounds and bioelectric signals. Tomorrow would be the culmination of everything he had learned, everything he had become. The crew of the Concordia would finally face the consequences of their betrayal. And they would learn that casting out a human to die was the worst mistake they could have made. The clearing looked exactly as it had 6 months ago, when Marcus's escape pod had crashed through the canopy and changed his life forever. The twisted wreckage still lay where it had fallen, now overgrown with bioluminescent vines that pulsed with the jungle's heartbeat. But everything else had changed. Captain Thelnara stood in the center of the clearing with her security team, weapons drawn and energy barriers humming around their formation. They had brought everything they could carry: heavy pulse rifles, personal shields, motion detectors, and enough firepower to level a small building. Zektar prowled the perimeter with his reptilian senses at maximum alert, while Vixka huddled behind the largest barrier generator. They were terrified, and they had every right to be. Marcus emerged from the jungle at exactly sunset as promised, but he didn't walk into the clearing like the broken officer they remembered. Instead, he rode Apex into their midst with the confidence of a conqueror returning home. The great predator moved with fluid grace, each step deliberate and controlled. Its armored scales caught the dying light and threw it back in patterns that seemed to hypnotize the watching aliens. Amber eyes burned with intelligence as Apex surveyed the assembled enemies, calculating distances and weaknesses with predatory precision. On the creature's back, Marcus sat with perfect balance, his body moving in harmony with his mount's gait. He wore armor crafted from the bones and scales of a dozen different apex predators, each piece telling the story of a successful hunt. Ritual scars marked his exposed skin in patterns that matched those of his adopted family, while his eyes held the cold focus of something that had learned to kill without hesitation. But he was not alone. Scout emerged from the trees to his left, no longer the injured youngling Marcus had helped heal, but a fully grown predator in its own right. Its scales had darkened to deep emerald, and its claws gleamed like polished weapons. 2 other juveniles flanked them, their synchronized movements speaking of pack coordination that had been perfected through months of hunting together. From the shadows came the Shadow Cats, their semi-corporeal forms flickering in and out of visibility as they surrounded the clearing. The clicking of giant insects filled the air as hundreds of the metallic creatures took positions in the canopy above. Even the carnivorous vines seemed to lean inward, sensing the approaching confrontation. Marcus had not just survived on Cathera Prime. He had become its apex predator, commanding the loyalty of creatures that had never before acknowledged any authority beyond their own instincts. "Hello, Captain?" Marcus said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." Thelnara's mandibles clicked rapidly as she struggled to process what she was seeing. "This is impossible. You're supposed to be dead." "I was," Marcus replied calmly. The Marcus Chen you cast out into this jungle died within hours of landing. What remains is something new, something you helped create through your betrayal. Sektar raised his weapon, the energy beam charging with an ominous whine. Stand down immediately, traitor. You're under arrest for... His words were cut off as Apex roared, the sound so powerful that several of the aliens' weapons sparked and overloaded. The Shadowcats materialized fully, their void black eyes fixed on the security chief with predatory hunger. In the trees above, the giant insects began dropping down on silk-strong threads, their mandibles clicking in anticipation. You seem to misunderstand the situation, Marcus said. I'm not here to surrender. I'm here to deliver a message. He reached into a pouch at his side and withdrew a small device, a standard military communicator that had been modified with jury-rigged components salvaged from a dozen different sources. When he activated it, the device projected a holographic display that filled the clearing with damning evidence. The communications logs from the Concordia appeared first, showing the conspiracy to sabotage the peace talks in horrifying detail. Supply manifests revealed the systematic theft of medical supplies intended for human colonies. Most damaging of all were the personal messages between crew members, discussing their plans to eliminate human influence in the galaxy through coordinated acts of terrorism. I've been busy these past 6 months, Marcus explained as the evidence continued to scroll past. Learning, adapting, and preparing for this moment. You see, you made a critical error when you tried to dispose of me. You gave me time to gather proof of your crimes, and more importantly, you gave me time to evolve. Thelnara stared at the evidence with growing horror. How did you get this information? Our communications are encrypted, secured, by technology that was designed to keep out conventional threats, Marcus interrupted. But I'm not conventional anymore. I've learned to think like a predator, to find weaknesses that civilized minds would never consider. Your security systems were built to stop hackers and spies, not something that hunts with the patience of a jungle cat and the ruthlessness of evolution itself. As if to emphasize his point, one of the shadow cats phased through the energy barrier surrounding the security team. The creature materialized just long enough to disable a weapon with surgical precision, then vanished again before anyone could react. The message was clear. Their defenses were useless against an enemy that fought by rules they couldn't comprehend. The evidence you're seeing has already been transmitted to every major news network, military command, and government in human space, Marcus continued. By now, emergency sessions are being called. Investigation committees are forming, and very uncomfortable questions are being asked about the loyalty of non-human crews on mixed-species vessels. Vixka stepped forward, her voice shaking with desperate anger. You've doomed us all. When this gets out, it will destroy everything we've worked for. The alliance between species, the peace treaties, the cooperative exploration programs, all of it will collapse. Marcus's expression didn't change, but Apex's growl carried notes of amusement that chilled the watching aliens to their bones. You should have thought of that before you decided to commit genocide. We were trying to prevent a war, Thelnara shouted. Humanity was becoming too powerful, too aggressive. Other species were preparing for conflict. We thought that by eliminating a few key figures, you thought that by murdering innocent diplomats you could somehow preserve peace? Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was ice beneath the words. You convinced yourselves that betrayal and terrorism were justified because you were afraid of what humans might become. Well, congratulations. Now you get to see what we actually become when you push us too far. He raised his hand and the jungle around them came alive with movement. Hundreds of creatures emerged from their hiding places, not just the apex predators and shadow cats, but every species that had learned to recognize Marcus as something between ally and alpha. The clearing filled with the sound of growls, clicks, and calls that harmonized into something that sounded almost like a war song. I could kill you all right now, Marcus said. It would be easy, and given what you've done, it would be justified. But that would make me just another predator. Instead, I'm going to give you something your conspiracy never offered humanity, a choice. The holographic display changed, showing new information, departure schedules, navigation routes, and supply manifests for a small fleet of ships. You have 48 hours to gather every member of your conspiracy and leave this sector of space. Go somewhere far away, somewhere human patrols don't venture. Start over, build new lives, and try to become better than what you were. Sektar's scales flushed with angry color. And if we refuse? Marcus smiled, and every predator in the clearing responded with sounds that spoke of hunger barely held in check. Then I hunt you down one by one, using everything this jungle has taught me. But it won't just be me. You see, while you were planning your little genocide, I was building something much more dangerous than a conspiracy. He gestured to the creatures surrounding them. I was building an alliance. Every species on this world has learned to work with me, to trust me, to follow me. And through the communication networks you're so proud of, I've been in contact with humans throughout the galaxy. Veterans like me, people who understand what it means to fight for survival. Individuals who aren't bound by the diplomatic niceties that made your conspiracy possible. The implications of his words sank in slowly, and Thelnara's compound eyes widened with dawning horror. You're talking about creating a human insurgency. I'm talking about ensuring that what you tried to do never happens again, Marcus corrected. Humanity is done being the junior partner in galactic politics. We're done trusting other species to act in our best interests. From now on, we protect ourselves. He guided Apex closer to the barrier protecting the alien crew, close enough that they could see the intelligence burning in the Predator's amber eyes. But it doesn't have to come to that. You can take the exile I'm offering, disappear into the frontier and spend the rest of your lives trying to atone for what you planned. Or you can refuse, and discover what humans are really capable of when we stop playing by civilized rules. The standoff stretched on for long minutes, filled only with the sound of alien hearts beating too fast and predator claws claw.